Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are. Scriddles here. Today's an awesome day. I want to build an army and a castle. And I need to know a few things before I get started. I need to know how to build a castle, how to build, medieval armor and weaponry and whatnot, and arrows and all that fun stuff. So, a game I've been playing a lot lately has been Age of Empires 4. And every time you finish a campaign mission, it gives you a little clip of some history behind how things are made. And, there's a lot more to running an army in the medieval days than I thought there would be. The first thing I want to start off by showing is just getting the chainmail to make your soldiers, protected in the early days with just chainmail. That alone is phenomenally aggressive. That, and you got the plate armor to do that is even crazier. And then you have your actual comfort, when you're on a campaign out, fighting people, the camping. You need so much stuff, so many people, so many whatever. It's expensive. It's expensive to run an army. That and building a castle takes forever. So I have some footage here that I'm going to put on the channel that I think everyone needs to see, because we forget about this when we are watching a medieval show or playing or playing a game that's medieval in nature, because we don't see this kind of stuff. So what goes into making a castle, what goes into making the soldiers comfortable on the battlefield, what goes into making arrows. Arrows alone, each arrow takes a couple hours to fully make. Think about that. In these movies, they're shooting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of arrows. Each one of those takes an hour. Let's say you shoot 100 arrows. That's 100 hours of labor that somebody went through to get just those arrows. So it's super crazy to think about, and I really wanted to put together a little video just showcasing some of this stuff so people who don't play games like I play would never see this footage. So hopefully you guys enjoy. Let's take a look at the footage that I have saved up here. It's going to be lengthy, but I'm telling you it's worth it.
At GriddleKake in France, to understand how castles were constructed, they're building one from scratch, using just the tools and materials of the medieval age. It's a 25-year project, the world's biggest archaeological experiment. The most important defensive feature of any castle was the wall surrounding it.
Castle walls had to be incredibly thick in order to resist attack and absorb the impact of projectiles fired from trebuchets.
The curtain wall was over 20 feet deep, interspersed with towers. In earlier Norman castles, they were square. But while on crusade, European knights saw that eastern towers were round. They realized that eliminating corners not only made them stronger, but also provided a better view of the surrounding landscape. Completing the walls will take some 30,000 tons of sandstone.
Transport costs in the Middle Ages were incredibly expensive. So having a good supply of local stone close to the castle was vital.
To extract it from the quarry, first a row of holes is hand-drilled.
Once all the holes are ready, I'm ready to put in the iron wedges, and I'm ready to split it open by hitting very hard on each wedge with a big sledgehammer.
The stone is split into usable blocks, then transported using horsepower and human effort. This treadwheel crane can lift up to half a ton.
The walls are built like sandwiches. On the outside you have facing walls built from better quality stones, and the inside, the rubble cores, they're built with softer stones and other offcuts from the quarry. And they're built up in layers with a very thick, coarse mortar.
This ingenious method makes the walls better able to withstand hits from a trebuchet. Sandstone is too hard to be carved into intricate windows, vaults, and steps. Instead, softer, more expensive limestone is used. These sophisticated building techniques make castles the ultimate feats of medieval engineering. It's a testament to their construction that so many still stand today. By 1100, the medieval knight was dressed from head to toe in mail.
Mail is really like a metal fabric. It moves and behaves like a cloth, but is actually made of hundreds and thousands of interlocking iron rings.
It could turn and deflect a sword blade.
As an armor, mail didn't work all by itself. It needed the addition of a padded coat. The coat absorbed the shock of the blow, whilst the mail turned away the cut. Together, they formed an incredibly effective protection.
The first stage in making mail was to create wire to the right thickness. To do this, it was pulled through a drawing plate, which had a series of ever smaller holes, until you got wire of the desired gauge.
To make the rings, we wind the wire onto a mandrel.
And then we take it off the mandrel and cut the rings.
So I've flattened the overlapping ends of the ring, and I've pierced a hole through it. And now Nick has to put a rivet in it. The basic construction of mail would be a ratio of 4:1. So each ring goes through 4 of its fellows. Here you can see I've made a set of 5, which will then be joined to other sets of 5 to create a sheet of mail.
Mail had to be tailored to a perfect fit. It had to be shaped for feet and legs, arms and hands, and, of course, the head. A skilled mail maker could make very precise shapes.
Of course, for more complicated parts of the body, like elbows, we can actually tailor it in 2 different directions at the same time.
Yeah, so if we fold this in half, we have an elbow.
One of the main benefits of tailoring in mail was that it meant a knight didn't have to carry a single ring of extra weight that he didn't need to.
The mail to cover a knight from head to toe required about 200,000 rings.
High-status knights would have had their mail edged with gold, but most importantly, it had to be functional.
Clad in mail with his shield and helmet, the knight was well equipped to face the weapons of the day. The battlefields of the 100 Years' War were full of danger. To defend against these weapons, a new type of armor was developed: plate armor.
Plate armor clad the knight in an articulating exoskeleton of hardened steel. A hard outer shell that still flexes and moves with the body.
It provided impressive protection and was an extraordinary technological achievement.
Now, one of the ways that armor gets its strength is through shape. Both of these pieces are made out the exact same thickness as steel, but I can show you there's one stronger than the other. Here's the one with no shape. You see it buckles immediately. If I swap it for one that's been forged to have strength and shape, you can see it's much stronger. It's going nowhere.
It wasn't just the shape that gave it strength. It was also how the metal was treated by the armorer.
Now, the benefits of using heat is it obviously makes the piece more plastic, more ductile, lets me shape it. but the fuel also adds layers of carbon into the outer surface. This helps me increase the hardness and strength of the material.
The art of the armorer was being able to judge the temperature of the metal by eye, managing the heat to create resilience in the metal. The combination of heat-treated metal and rigid shapes meant that armor didn't need to be so thick and heavy, making it much easier to fight in. But good quality plate armor did have its downside. It was very expensive.
Now, not everyone could afford full steel plate armor. For the common man, there is the brigandine. Now, these are made up of overlapping steel plates that are then riveted through a textile outer. This gives you a much bigger range of movement, but is limited and is not as strong as a full steel breastplate. That said, it is much cheaper and much easier to maintain.
At its best, the armored knight was invincible. But armor didn't just provide defense. It was also a weapon and an expression of a knight's power and prestige. Armor transformed its wearer into a work of art. Longbows were powerful weapons, but keeping archers supplied with ammunition was a major undertaking.
This is a modern arrow. Small and lightweight. Pretty much what everyone shoots these days. Compared to this medieval war arrow. Look at the size of this thing. It's a beast.
A medieval army might need more than 1 million war arrows on campaign, and each one had to be made by hand. It was a labor-intensive business, and the person who did it was called a fletcher. First, a log is split into square staves. Then the fletcher uses a plane to start roughing out the shape.
Ugh, how do I get it round?
Not only have you got to make it round, you've got to make it bobtailed. Look at that.
Bobtailed?
You see that's coming down thinner down that end? There's a natural taper coming down there to that end.
A plane with a curved blade is used to create the taper. This makes the arrow aerodynamic.
This is an incredibly painstaking process for one arrow.
Most of them are just for one shot as well.
Next, a slot is cut to receive a piece of horn. The horn reinforces the nock. That's the notch that fits the arrow to the bowstring. Without the horn insert, the power of a heavy warbow could split and shatter an arrow. Once the horn is in place, the nock is sawn and shaped. Then the fletcher has to attach the feathers to the shaft.
Now what you've got to do is you've got to get rid of the stiffness of the quill. You're going to work it down so it's nice and thin.
So this is dogfish skin?
Yeah, medieval sandpaper.
The feathers are glued in place and then secured with thread. The final process is to arm the arrow with its arrowhead. The person who makes these is called an arrowsmith. From a blank piece of iron, he starts with the part that fits over the arrow shaft. First, he makes the bar flat, then uses a special former to create a socket. The final stage is to hammer out the shape of the head. Arrow stocks had to be prepared far in advance of a campaign. It was impossible to make them in sufficient numbers overnight. A medieval war arrow like this could only be shot from a big, exceptionally powerful bow. And it packed a mighty punch. A medieval army on the march was a city on the move. No expense was spared to keep knights and nobles in the lap of luxury.
Knights lived in luxurious tents called pavilions, which they had all of their furnishing, proper chairs and tables and tableware, real beds with fine linens, even wall hangings.
All this furniture had to be transported, and that's on top of what was needed for combat. Weapons and armor needed an army of artisans to maintain them.
The armourer's job on campaign was one of maintenance, constantly repairing, knocking out dents, simply changing straps, or replacing rivets that had broken. If you think of the knight as a race car driver, the armourer is his chief mechanic. Without him, he would not be able to function.
Also following an army was a band of opportunistic civilians, the camp followers. All vying to sell their services and goods to the soldiers. When on the march, most of the thousands of soldiers were mounted. Each knight would have at least 6 horses, all needing grooms, farriers, and fodder.
The royal household brought with them their clerks, their priests, essential for men who feared they might die in battle. And of course, their cooks.
The common soldier subsisted mainly on bread and a thick soup called pottage. It was an altogether different story for the knights.
A knight on campaign would expect the best food. So we have game, we have fine meats, we have fruit when it's in season, always cooked, because food is tied in with health as well. That's very important. And I'm just finishing off a dish here of spiced meatballs with a red wine and pine nut sauce.
French and English armies could be on campaign for months on end, maneuvering and skirmishing until they took to the field for a decisive battle.